make these incredible tomato tarts at her specialty food store, Loaves and Fishes. I always thought it looked so daunting to make, but I got up my courage, I asked her for the recipe, and I made it. And you know what? It wasn't scary at all. So I'm going to show you how to make it. First, I'm going to make the crust. So I'm going to start with 2½ cups of flour, just all-purpose flour. And when you're measuring flour, just lighten it. And then dip your cup in like that, and just level it off, right into a food processor. It's actually Anna who taught me to make pastry in a food processor too. I miss her. That's 2½ Okay, 2½ cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm just gonna mix those together, one pulse to make sure they're well mixed. I have 12 tablespoons of very cold diced butter. It's about 3/4 inch dice. I'm just going to pulse it. You want the butter the size of peas in the flour. Just want to make sure the butter isn't completely incorporated, because the water in the butter, when it hits the heat in the oven, is what expands and makes flaky pastry. Okay, the next thing is 2 egg yolks. Go right in. Just going to pulse them. This is unique to Anna's crust. Okay, next thing is ice water, and it's got to be really cold. I just took some ice out. Ice water is really important because it keeps the butter very cold. Slowly mix it in, and you'll see it will start to form a dough. Just until it's almost completely combined. A little flour. Okay, just gonna dump this out on the board. Somebody once commented about Stephen Sondheim's music, which I adore, that it wasn't hummable. And he said, well, you know, the only difference between a hummable song and a not hummable song is just singing it 3 times. Well, I kind of feel that way about scary dishes. The only difference between making a tomato tart and not making it is just do it once or twice on your own when it's quiet and nobody's watching, and you'll be an expert. Okay, now I'm just going to wrap it up with plastic wrap. I'm going to refrigerate it for 30 minutes, just make sure the butter is really cold before I roll it out. And then I'm going to show you how I'm going to get from this dough to this gorgeous crust, and you won't believe how easy it is. I took the chilled dough out of the fridge and put it on a floured surface, then started rolling from the center to the edges with a floured rolling pin. I trimmed the sides. Then I used the rolling pin to transfer the pastry to a sheet pan without stretching it. Now here's a trick for blind baking. Instead of all the beans, I just put another sheet pan on top. You have to make sure the second sheet pan isn't bent or the pastry won't stay flat. Then I put it in a 400-degree oven. After 15 minutes, I took the top sheet pan off, pierced the pastry with a fork to stop it from puffing up, and I put it back in for another 10 minutes until it was lightly browned. Then took it out to cool. Now that the crust is completely cooled, I'll show you how I assemble it. So I want it to have lots of flavor. I'm going to start with 6 tablespoons of Dijon mustard. I know it sounds like a lot, but it really makes a difference. So just spread it out with a brush. And the next thing is 3/4 of a pound of Gruyere cheese, which is a lot. In order to get 3/4 of a pound of Gruyere, what you want is a 1-pound block of Gruyere. After you cut off the rind, it'll be 3/4 of a pound. You can grate it by hand, but it's so much faster in the food processor. I use a carrot grating disc. I'm going to hold back about 1/2 cup so I can put it on top of the tart. And I'm going to put 1/2 cup of grated Parmesan on too. So now the combination of the Gruyere and the Parmesan is really fantastic. I know it looks like a cheese tart so far, but it's going to be a tomato tart, I promise. And these are the tomatoes. Let me show you how I made them. I put a cup of parsley in the food processor with 1/2 cup of coarsely chopped fresh basil leaves, 3 large garlic cloves, and a tablespoon of fresh thyme leaves, a teaspoon of kosher salt, and a teaspoon of pepper. Process them, and then with the motor running, poured 1/2 cup of olive oil through the feed tube and processed it until it was combined. Then just pour the mixture over 2.5 pounds of cored and sliced red tomatoes and toss everything together gently to coat the tomatoes. Next, I'm going to do the assembly, and trust me, that's not scary either. And when you're done with this tart, your friends are going to say, "You made that yourself?" Feels really good. Next, I'm finishing the tomato tart and sharing other decorating ideas to make your pastries look very professional. Chef Jose Andres has the best trick for separating eggs. And I'm conquering scary salted caramel nuts. If you follow the directions, they'll come out perfectly. I'm tackling scary dishes, and one of them is a tart. I'm making honest tomato tart. I've got the base, I've got the cheese already. One of the things that makes all the difference is how you arrange the tomatoes. I could just do them casually, but I think what makes it really professional is lining them up in perfect rows. I'll show you how I do it. I'm going to drizzle on a little bit of herb olive oil. One of the important things about this is you can use red tomatoes, you can use heirloom tomatoes, but it's really important that they're all the same size. Okay, that's the herb oil, a little of the Gruyere that I saved right on top. It's going to melt into the tomatoes. A little bit of Parmesan cheese, give it a little spice. And this is going to go into the oven, 375 degrees for 30 minutes. And this is going to be one glorious tomato tart. And while that bakes, let me tell you about some of my other tarts where the arrangement on top makes it look really professional. When I make a goat cheese and zucchini tart, I spread the cheese on as a base and then arrange the zucchini in overlapping concentric circles. My French apple tart is simply a thin crust, apple slices laid out diagonally and topped with sugar and butter. Then after it's baked, it's brushed with apricot jelly and calvados to give it an expert finish. Sometimes I also make individual tomato tarts, but with a shortcut, store-bought puff pastry. I layer them with Parmesan, sauteed onions, garlic, and thyme, crumbled goat cheese, a thick slice of tomato, fresh basil leaves, and Parmesan. Delicious. And little tarts look great with ripe fresh strawberries, an apricot glaze, and shelled pistachios for crunch and color. So I think the tomato tart is done. Oof, this is just gorgeous. Sometimes I just cut it right in the pan, serve it in the pan, very casual. But if you want it to look a little more professional, I transfer it to a board and cut it right on the board. So I'm just going to cut it right across. You need a big knife for this. I think 3 pieces across. This is great with a salad. Really nice summer lunch. It's always funny to me when somebody wants to compliment something you made at home and they say, "That looks really professional." But if you want to compliment something somebody bought at a bakery, they say, "That tastes so homemade." It's such a contradiction. So around here we say, "Homemade by professionals." These are really big squares, but it's lunch. And I can't wait till it's served. And now, I've got the coolest trick for you from an amazing chef.